At 3:07 on the afternoon of 21st of March, 2002, Amanda Jane Dowler, known as Millie, to her friends and family, and a friend left Heathside School in Weybridge, Surrey, England, and made their way to the railway station. The pair disembarked at Walton-on-Thames, one stop before Hersham, where they had intended to go. After stopping at the station cafe for something to eat, 13-year-old Millie phoned her father responsibly at 3:47 p.m., telling him she'd be home in half an hour. It was 4:05 when they left the cafe, and Millie started walking by herself towards her house. She was last seen 3 minutes later walking down Station Avenue, spotted by a friend of her sister who happened to be waiting at a bus stop. Further along the road, a closed-circuit television camera did not show Dowler again. This was the last sighting of the beloved schoolgirl. Amanda Jane Dowler was born in Surrey on June 25, 1988. She enjoyed music and played the saxophone. Millie was youngest daughter of Bob and Sally Dowler. She disappeared when she was just 13 years old. When Dowler failed to arrive home, authorities were notified of her absence at 7 p.m. A large-scale investigation ensued, with 100 police and helicopters scouring the vicinity around Hersham, fields, streets, and rivers included. To facilitate the search, detectives who had handled Sarah Payne's abduction case were called to assist. Sarah Payne was another high-profile missing child case that had occurred in 2000. She had lived in Hersham, Surrey, and disappeared near a cornfield of her grandfather in Kingston Gorse. Sadly, the 9-year-old was found murdered. The family launched multiple appeals for information in the media, hoping to get the word out everywhere, holding out hope Millie would be found unharmed. Sally Dowler could not think of a reason her daughter would run away, even though it was hoped she had left home of her own accord. It was reported in 2011 that Dowler had previously written a mock letter to leave her home, and notes showing her dissatisfaction. Although this was deemed as childish machinations and not taken seriously, the police had determined she was most likely not taken by force about a week after Millie disappeared. No one had come forward as a witness that there was a struggle. The family contended that it was unlikely to have gone off with someone she did not know of her own free will. In April 2002, a body was found in the Thames, leading to speculation that it was the girl. However, it was later identified to be the body of a 73-year-old woman. The Sun newspaper offered a £100,000 reward for Millie's safe return. Millie's parents continued sending text messages to her mobile phone in the hope of a reply. After she had been missing for more than a month, the authorities informed the family that she had most likely passed away. In September 2002, mushroom pickers discovered human remains in Yateley Heath Woods near Yateley, Hampshire. After examination, it was determined that the remains belonged to Amanda Dowler via dental records. The decomposition was so advanced that a cause of death could not be established. None of her belongings or clothing have ever been located. As a result of this discovery, Surrey police changed the case from a missing person situation to a homicide investigation named Operation Ruby. On November 22, 2002, police set up a roadblock near where the body of Dowler was located. Despite questioning approximately 6,000 motorists in the vicinity, no information was uncovered. By initially suspecting Dowler's father, following usual procedure for such cases, Surrey police eventually apologized for any potential oversights that may have been caused by their focus on this track. Then, on March 23, 2003, DNA belonging to an unknown male was detected on an article of her clothing in her bedroom, hinting at an acquaintance with the killer. However, this lead was eliminated within 3 months, along with a connection to a church robbery in Sunderland. In 2008, Levi Belfield, a serial killer, was found guilty of murdering 2 women, Marcia McDonnell and Amelie Dellingrange. He had also attempted to murder Kate Sheedy by ramming her with his car. His conviction soon raised suspicion of him in the Millie Dowler case, as CCTV cameras had caught a red Daewoo Nexia in the area at the time of her disappearance. According to records, Belfield's then-partner lived nearby and owned a car of that same make and color. The same camera that had caught the last moments of Millie walking innocently home was able to capture a Daewoo Nexia belonging to Levi Belfield's girlfriend, Emma Mills, at 4:32 p.m. In an interview with the Daily Mirror newspaper from prison in 2009, Belfield suggested it was likely he had been behind the wheel of the red Daewoo seen in Walton-on-Thames. However, he was cautious in how he answered questions. "I did use the Daewoo once, and I was stopped by the police for speeding." Despite not finding the car itself, Belfield was eventually charged with Millie's murder in March 2010. The trial of Belfield at the Central Criminal Court, chaired by Mr. Justice Wilkie, ended on June 23, 2011, after the jury found him guilty. The next day, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and, due to his previous murder convictions 3 years before, the trial judge recommended life sentence without the possibility of parole. Another charge of attempted abduction of Rachel Cowles, an 11-year-old girl who had been offered a lift in Walton area by someone in a red car on March 20, 2002, was dropped as newspapers published prejudicial material. Nevertheless, the judge ordered that the accusation should remain on record. As of June 23, 2011, Levi Belfield, who had already been sentenced to life for the murders of Marcia McDonnell and Amelie Delagrange, as well as the attempted murder of Kate Shitty, was also found guilty of abducting and murdering Millie Dowler and was sentenced to an additional life sentence. According to Surrey police, Belfield admitted to abducting, abusing, and killing Dowler on January 27, 2016. Following their daughter's death, Dowler's parents established a charity called Millie's Fund to promote public safety, in particular, the safety of children and young people. A Minnesota man has been charged with murdering and dismembering his girlfriend and leaving behind a mountain of evidence, including a Google search for the word jugular, the day she disappeared. And in a grim twist, police have learned that another woman tied to the suspect has been missing for 2 years. To put it bluntly, we're concerned for her safety also, St. Paul Police Sergeant Mike Ernster said at a press conference. Joseph Jorgensen, 40, barricaded himself in his Maplewood bedroom and started a fire when police, following the trail of clues left behind, showed up at his apartment to search it in June 2023. He allegedly tried to grab a SWAT officer's AR-15, but was arrested. 2 days later, police discovered the chopped-up remains of Manijeh Starren in coolers at a storage facility, where a unit had been rented under the name of Jorgensen's roommate. "Thank you to the officers for following every lead," Starren's brother wrote on Facebook after her body was found. "My beautiful sister, you will be missed greatly. Heaven has gotten a new angel, and we haven't stopped looking and found you to bring you home. Hope you are sitting with Grandpa fishing and watching dolphins up there fly high. I love you." According to her family, the mother of 3 struggled with addiction and was supposed to enter treatment in April, but never made it there. The last time anyone had contact with her was April 21st, when she spoke by phone with the father of one of her children. Her own father reported her missing on May 1st, and soon after, police learned that she was allegedly the victim of domestic violence. Her son's father relayed to investigators that she said Jorgensen had once wrapped a rope around her neck, and a neighbor reported seeing her with a black eye and red marks on her neck. The neighbor asked Starren if she wanted to call police, but the 33-year-old told her, "It will just make things worse." Investigators began collecting evidence that pointed to a grim outcome, starting with security video that showed Starren running from her apartment on April 21st and Jorgensen pulling her back in. Police said she was never seen on video again, but Jorgensen was caught on camera coming in and out of the apartment 28 times in the following week, and once he was seen carrying a suitcase and duffel bags into his roommate's pickup truck. Inside Starren's apartment, police found a scene of chaos, a cracked TV and microwave. the sheet pulled off the bed with a large piece of a foam pad cut out, and blood on the couch in the living room and in the kitchen that would later be revealed as the victims. The manager of the building where Jorgensen lived told police that residents had complained around May 15th or 16th of a stench from his apartment that smelled like something had died. Shortly afterwards, the manager and maintenance employee saw Jorgensen carrying and dragging large black duffel bags out of the apartment. They commented to each other that it looked like Jorgensen was carrying a dead body. Police would later find blood in a closet in the apartment, along with recent maggot activity, according to reports. They also found 2 padlock keys that matched the storage unit, where cell phone records show that Jorgensen had been on May 18th. In addition to the physical evidence, investigators found Jorgensen had repeatedly used Starren's food stamps card, had purchased a large amount of cleaning supplies, and had made some unusual Google searches. On April 21st, he searched for jugular. On May 1st, he searched, "What do police do with a missing persons report?" On May 3rd, he Googled, "How to clear cookies from Android phone." On May 27th, he looked up, "How to remove GPS lime scooter." On June 4th, Jorgensen Googled, "Lime for soil." The complaint noted that lime can be used to speed up the decomposition process of a body and to reduce the smell of decomposition. Detectives said they also found 2 threatening messages Jorgensen sent to Starren 2 weeks before she vanished. "And you owe me 2 because you called the cops on me 2 times. Very clear I was of that being punishable by hanging. I'm giving you this plea bargain opportunity. So you welcome," one read. The other said, "Hope you die of a kidney infection." In the course of investigating the killing of Starren, police learned that another missing woman, Fanta Exayavong, 33, was last seen with Jorgensen before she disappeared in July 2021. Jorgensen remains in the Ramsey County Jail. A Connecticut mother of 3 was killed with an axe by her ex-boyfriend in an attack that authorities say was witnessed by her teenage son. Ewan DeWitt, 42, of Roxbury, has been charged with murder, risk of injury, and reckless endangerment in connection the death of 40-year-old Julie Minogue, according to the Milford Police Department. DeWitt is also charged with violation of a protection order and restraining order, the latter of which was granted just 5 days before the killing, authorities said. Police said the 911 call they received on December 6th was made by the victim's 17-year-old son, who reported his mother was being assaulted by a man inside their home. He was woken up by screams and went downstairs, where he thought he heard DeWitt yelling, "You didn't believe me," reports stated. The teen claimed DeWitt was holding an axe and his mother was on the floor, covered in blood. The teen then ran upstairs, dialed 911, and jumped out of his bedroom window, where he was met by police. Responding officers found Minogue's body on the kitchen floor surrounded by blood. They also discovered a large axe on the stove. Police said the victim's 3-year-old son was also inside the home during the alleged slaying, but was unharmed. Both children are in the care of family members. Though DeWitt fled the scene before law enforcement arrived, a suspect matching his description was captured on Ring camera footage, which shows a man walking with an axe near the scene of the attack. DeWitt was eventually arrested in West Haven, but not before his mother informed police that she had received a call from him in which he claimed to have killed his girlfriend, according to court documents. According to an affidavit, Minogue claimed she feared DeWitt would kill her, and that's exactly what authorities allege happened that day. "I don't feel I should be subjected to this abuse any longer," she allegedly wrote in the restraining order she was granted on December 1st. According to police, he had sent several harassing text messages to Minogue in the days leading up to the filing. However, this is not DeWitt's first encounter with law enforcement. He was previously arrested by Milford Police in November 2019 for assaulting Minogue, and a protective order was issued at the time. Julie Minogue's sister, Alison Barati Corcoran, said on a GoFundMe that the single mother was a victim of domestic violence and had tried multiple times to keep her and her children safe. Now, Nicholas, Sean, and 3-year-old Luke are left without a mother, someone who cared for them with ease and love. The fundraiser's description reads, Barati Corcoran hopes that by raising $100,000, her nephews will have enough financial support to be able to thrive in their careers and continue their education. DeWitt was arraigned at the Connecticut Superior Court in Milford on December 7th and is being held on a $5 million bond. It's not immediately clear if the suspect has entered a plea or retained an attorney to comment on his behalf. The Milford police then took a DNA sample from DeWitt after DeWitt appeared in Milford Superior Court for a motion from Milford State's Attorney Margaret Kelly requesting DeWitt's DNA. The prosecution wants to see if it matches DNA found on the weapon used to kill Julie Minogue, the mother of DeWitt's 3-year-old son. Julie Minogue said in court testimony before she died, "He says clearly that he wants his mission in life is to ruin my life. It would be the third and final time in less than a month that Julie Minogue would plead to authorities, including police and 2 judges, that her life was in danger. That's saying that he wants to ruin my life, so he wants to basically kill me," Julie said in court testimony. 3 weeks after Julie went to police for more protection, she was murdered. Milford police admit her request wasn't processed. Minogue had brought her concerns to police just 3 weeks before her murder. The officer who handled her report submitted an arrest warrant for DeWitt to the state's attorney's office, but it was sent back seeking more information about the texts and then never resubmitted. DeWitt wasn't charged with harassment and violation of a protective order until after Minogue's murder. The officer who handled Minogue's initial report was put on leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation into what went wrong. According to authorities, the officer assigned to the case, Scott Nablin, prepared an arrest warrant for DeWitt, but it was returned by a prosecutor seeking additional, unspecified information and not submitted again prior to Minogue's death. After the homicide, Nablin was put on leave pending an internal investigation. Officer Scott Nablin, who was placed on leave, resigned in July following an investigation in connection with his inaction leading up to the death of Julie Minogue in December 2022. Minogue's family previously announced they intend to file a lawsuit against the city and the police department for not preventing her death. On July 6, 1973, Linda Ann O'Keefe, 11, woke up for summer school at her home in Newport Beach, California. She put on the dress her mother had made for her. It was a pretty dress with light blue flowers and dark blue trim. She then put a ponytail in her hair, put on her white ankle socks and dark blue shoes, and headed out the door. Her piano teacher would be picking her up that day. Linda was a shy little girl and a Girl Scout who loved painting, crafts, and piano. Her mother said she loved to express herself through drawing and was incredibly talented. She loved laying out in the sun and going to the beach, a true California girl. Linda would often watch TV and kept her room extremely clean, even asking her mother to assess her room after she was done cleaning. She was a sensitive child who had just lost her cat. When her pet died, her mother said it was hard to console her. She took it very hard. Linda had 2 sisters, and she was remarkably close to her eldest sister, an adult, and worked in a dry cleaning shop while living at their parents' home. Linda was also a member of the local youth center, and normally she rode her bicycle to Lincoln Elementary School in Corona del Mar. On that day, however, her piano teacher was giving her a ride to school, so later she walked the short distance home from school. Linda was last seen alive walking home from summer school. A day later, a man searching for frogs in the Back Bay area found her body in a ditch. She had been brutally raped and murdered by strangulation. On the 45th anniversary of Linda O'Keefe's murder, the Newport Beach Police Department created the Twitter thread, Linda Story. The series of 68 tweets, told through Linda's point of view, drew readers in with details about her life as well as foreboding moments of her last day. Linda O'Keefe's case went cold long ago. Needing a way to bring her story back into the public, Newport Beach Police Sergeant Court Depweg consulted with Jen Manzella, then the spokeswoman for the department, on how to do just that. Right away, Manzella suggested Twitter. It was so important for me to give a little girl whose life was cut short at 11 years old the opportunity to speak again, she said. Linda is going to help us find this man who did this to her. Linda, pictured front row left, was the middle child in her family of 5. Her dad, Richard, was a machinist and they shared a special bond. Her mom, Barbara, was an artist and working seamstress. Linda's older sister, Cindy, says their mom sewed most of their clothes. According to Linda's sister, Cindy Borgeson, Linda was a very gentle, lovely soul who loved Billie Holiday and Nancy Drew. Linda was a Girl Scout and nature lover. Cindy says their family would vacation in the redwoods and Linda would crouch down and little newts and snakes would come right up to her. She says, Linda saw the beauty in the world and always seemed to see the good in people. Linda usually ride her bike to school, but on this day, she got a ride from her piano teacher. Without her bike and not wanting to walk home, Linda, pictured right, called her mom at the end of school from the school office and begged her for a ride home. Cindy overheard her mom's end of the call telling Linda she was too busy with work to pick her up and to walk home. Linda, upset and crying, eventually left the school office. She sat on the curb in front of the school for a little bit before beginning her walk. Around 1:15 p.m. that day, less than an hour after Linda called for a ride, a young woman named Janine, who goes by Jondi, pictured left, and her mother spotted Linda talking to a white man in a turquoise van near the intersection of Marguerite and Inlet Drive. The women lived a few houses down from Linda's family and thought the scene was odd, but didn't think it was dangerous. It was the last time anyone saw Linda alive. As dinner time approached and Linda still hadn't returned home, her mother started to get worried. After calling friends and driving around the neighborhood, Linda's mom called police. An intensive search for Linda began. The search for Linda lasted through the night and into the next morning. On the morning of July 7, 1973, a local architect named Ron Yeo was biking along a nature trail known as the Back Bay with his young son when Ron went to show his son a spot to find frogs. He instead made a gruesome discovery. He found Linda O'Keefe's body. Linda was still wearing the dress her mom made for her and carrying a homemade book bag. The Orange County Coroner's Office found that Linda had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and her death was ruled a homicide. But detectives couldn't figure out who killed her. The sleepy beach town of Corona del Mar was shaken after Linda's murder. While police were trying to find her killer, Linda's classmates wanted to find him too. Our 11-year-old selves, we all got on our bikes, and we all wanted to help, said Terry Briscoe Corwin. They searched for the van all around town, but just like police, they didn't find anything. Decades later, investigators got a break. A forward-thinking criminalist at the time of Linda's murder had collected swabs of the killer's semen from Linda's body and preserved it. As technology advanced, a DNA profile of an unidentified suspect was generated. In October 2017, Newport Beach Sergeant Depweg hired a company called Parabon Nanolabs to take the suspect's DNA and generate a snapshot, a composite based on the suspect's genetic characteristics. Newport Beach police ended their Twitter thread, Linda Story, with the new composite, revealing it to the public for the first time. They asked a question that has haunted investigators for decades. If science could give the assailant a face, could it give him a name? Linda's classmates never forgot about what happened. When Linda's story was published, they waited anxiously to see if anything would come of it. Terry Briscoe Corwin says, "We were all together on pins and needles waiting to see. Who is this guy? Linda's story didn't directly lead investigators to Linda's killer, but Sergeant Diepweg says it paid off big time. On February 19, 2019, more than 45 years after her sister was murdered, Cindy Borgeson received a call from Sergeant Diepweg telling her that they had arrested her sister's killer. I was so excited. I wish my parents were here to hear this news. Detectives also submitted the DNA recovered from Linda's body to a genealogical website. They received a clue that James Allen Neal, 73, was a viable suspect in Linda's murder. He was found living in Monument, Colorado, and arrested in February 2019, then extradited to Orange County, California. Neal pleaded not guilty to Linda's murder and to allegations of lewd and lascivious acts on two other girls under age 14 between 1995 and 2004. Finally, the O'Keefe family would see justice, but that sense of potential closure would be short-lived. Neal was taken to an area hospital on May 25, 2020, due to an undisclosed illness, and died a few days later. The Orange County Sheriff said he did not appear to have COVID-19 symptoms. Even though Linda's killer never stood trial, the technology and investigative techniques used by Newport Police Department to identify and apprehend Neal were innovative and effective. Hopefully, such emerging investigative tools give new hope to other families of murder victims. I never really thought that they would actually ever find the individual responsible, Linda's older sister Cindy Borgeson stated. After all this time, finding out there is a face and a name just brings additional closure. Despite the closure Borgeson described, their mother carried the guilt of not going to pick her daughter up for the rest of her life. Linda's mother, Barbara, passed away in 2005. In 2008, her father, Richard, passed, never feeling that sense of closure or peace. For the investigators, their work was not in vain. It is their hope that the O'Keefe family no longer feels haunted by not knowing the fate of their beloved daughter. On the night of January 6, 2007, Channon Christian, 21, and her boyfriend Christopher Newsom, 23, headed out for a friend's birthday party in Knoxville, Tennessee. They never arrived. En route to the festivities, they were carjacked, tortured, raped, and killed in acts of unthinkable violence. Dina Christian, Shannon's mother, awoke with a bad feeling on January 7th. Channon, a sociology major at the University of Tennessee, wasn't home or answering phone calls. The worry intensified when Shannon's best friend called and said that the two were no-shows at the party. Then Shannon's boss phoned to say she never came to work. Dana dialed 911. Because Channon and Chris were adults, authorities couldn't step in until after 24 hours had passed. In the meantime, Shannon's cell phone pinged near Cherry Street, a high-crime neighborhood in the city. It's not an area you go to unless you live there or unless you're up to no good, Knoxville News-Sentinel reporter Jamie Satterfield stated. The Christians and Newsoms went searching for their kids on their own, and Shannon's father found her car. Ed Kingsbury, an investigator with the Knoxville Police Department, stated that the vehicle had been wiped down and the scrubbing was an ominous red flag. The situation went from bad to worse. On January 8th, a man's burned body, still smoking in the aftermath of being set ablaze, was found near train tracks. Authorities confirmed that it was Chris Newsom. He had been bound and shot 3 times and set on fire. To locate Channon, police examined her car and found an envelope. It was dusted for prints and yielded a hit. Tim Hutchison, a retired Knox County sheriff, stated, "The suspect, Lamarcus Davidson, was a known carjacker who'd recently gotten out of prison. Investigators learned that he was renting a small house on Chipman Street in the Cherry Street area. On January 9th, investigators searched the house and found Shannon's lifeless body. She had been gang-raped, choked, and bound before being put in a garbage can and suffocated to death. "They stuffed her in a trash can like a piece of trash," Dina Christian stated. A search of the murder scene turned up a video rented from a library in Kentucky by a man named George Thomas. As the investigation crossed state lines and federal investigators were called in, Knoxville police questioned Davidson's girlfriend, Daphne Sutton, who'd lived in the Chipman Street house right up until Channon and Chris went missing. Sutton told authorities that on January 7th, Davidson was at the house with Thomas, Davidson's half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, and a woman named Vanessa Coleman. Sutton said she'd last seen Davidson when she dropped him off later that day at the home of a person named Eric Boyd. Knoxville police tracked down Boyd, who led them to a house where Davidson was holed up. As the SWAT team grabbed Davidson, the suspect declared that he'd done nothing to that girl. Meanwhile, about 133 miles away in Lebanon, Kentucky, Cobbins, Coleman, and Thomas were arrested. Authorities counted on the alleged co-conspirators to rat each other out, and Thomas revealed that Davidson was the ringleader of the murders and named Boyd as his accomplice. Authorities had 5 suspects in custody, and mounting DNA material incriminating suspects in varying ways to Shannon's killing, despite the fact household clean had been poured in her mouth to remove evidence, according to court records. On the other hand, DNA evidence on Chris was destroyed when his body was set ablaze. Aware that there was evidence, the 5 suspects told their version of the events to cast blame on others. A picture of the fatal events emerged. Davidson needed a vehicle, and Channon and Christopher were targeted for carjacking. When the two were ambushed at gunpoint, another car approached and spooked the suspects. The couple was pushed into the vehicle and taken to the Chipman Street house. A key element of the case turned on Tennessee's criminal responsibility law. If you're aware of a crime and do nothing to stop it, you're held responsible too. Except for Boyd, suspects implicated themselves by admitting that they were in the house. Among the questions that emerged was whether Coleman was a willing participant in the crime or held against her will. In a journal, Coleman described events around January 7th as fun adventures. It cast doubts on her claims of innocence. Trials unfolded separately. In April 2008, Boyd was found guilty of being an accessory to a fatal carjacking and of aiding Davidson, a fugitive. He was sentenced to the maximum of 18 years. The Knox County DA built sturdy cases against Davidson, Cobbins, and Thomas. Over 8 months, each was tried independently on 46 charges, including the kidnap, rape, and murder of Channon and Chris. This was the worst crime Knoxville had experienced, Hugh Newsom stated. Photographs of the crimes caused some people in court to pass out. The judge, former Knox County Criminal Court, Judge Richard Baumgartner, declared that anyone who cried would be kicked out of court. "You will not be allowed to be in this courtroom if you do that because I will not tolerate it," Baumgartner said in taped proceedings. The verdicts were delivered in 3 independent trials before 3 separate 12-member juries. Davidson was found guilty of 2 premeditated murders and received the death penalty. Thomas and Cobbins each got life sentences without the possibility of parole. Coleman was found guilty of lesser charges and was sentenced to 53 years. But a shocking twist that threw judgments into question came 4 years after the murders. In January 2011, Baumgartner announced that he was stepping down and admitted that he was hooked on opiates. The disgraced judge resigned and eventually pleaded to misconduct before he died at age 70 in 2018. The state Supreme Court ruled that because there was DNA evidence in the Davidson and Cobbins convictions, the sentences would stand, but new trials for Thomas and Coleman were ordered. In November 2012, Coleman was found guilty of facilitating a deadly carjack and kidnap. Her sentence was reduced from 53 years to 35 years. 6 months later, Thomas's sentence was reduced to life with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Relieved that perpetrators didn't get away scot-free, the Newsoms were still determined that Boyd would pay for their son's death. "We took it upon ourselves to go and talk to George Thomas," Hugh Newsom stated. Prosecutors struck a deal with him if Thomas testified against Boyd. 11 years after the murders, Thomas threw everything on Boyd, Satterfield stated. On August 13, 2018, Boyd was found guilty of 36 charges connected to the kidnap, rape, and murder of Channon and Chris. He received 2 life sentences plus 90 years in prison. Davidson and Boyd have unsuccessfully appealed their sentences. The Christians and the Newsoms are present for every appeal. Seeking justice for their kids never ends. Janet Levine March had a seemingly perfect life at the time she disappeared in August 1996. Married to a successful lawyer, this mother of 2 had a flourishing art career and lived in a dream home she had designed and built. Arthur March and his son Perry are 2 Americans who have escaped to the central Mexican town of Ajayac. Years ago, Arthur March became one of hundreds of American retirees who settled in the little lakeside town. But his son Perry was a successful Nashville attorney in the prime of his career. Why did he come down to Ajayac? I brought Perry down here because he didn't have any other place to go, says Arthur March. On a summer night in 1996, Perry March's wife, Janet Levine March, mysteriously disappeared without a trace. And ever since, Perry March says he has become a target too, pursued by people he says are determined to destroy him. About a month and a half ago, there was an effort afoot to either have me killed or have me arrested, to plant something like cocaine in my car, says Perry. And, he says, these same people are trying to kidnap his 2 children, Sammy and Zeepy. Janet's disappearance still mystifies her family and close friends. Her father, Larry Levine, says Janet's plans included kids, marriage, a family, a home, an art career, her mother Carolyn adds. The Levines had proudly watched their daughter fulfill those plans, one by one. Janet returned to Nashville with her college boyfriend, Perry March, in 1985. They married in 1987 and lived in a house just a few miles from her parents. I cared about him a lot, an awful lot, Carolyn Levine now says about Perry. She became almost a surrogate mother to Perry. His own mother had died in an accident when he was only 9 years old. Janet loved him, and as long as she did. Then we wanted to do everything we could to help him, Larry Levine recalls. And Janet's parents did help him. Larry Levine paid Perry's way through Vanderbilt Law School in Nashville. Then Perry began practicing law and ended up working in his father-in-law's firm. He treated me as a confidant and as a son, says Perry. Meanwhile, Janet pursued her art. She had done some really fine work, sold some paintings, and had been hired to do some commercial illustrations, says Perry. 3 years after they married, Sammy was born. Then, 4 years later, Janet gave birth to their daughter Zipporah, known as Zeepy. And in 1995, Perry says Janet fulfilled yet another of her dreams, building a spectacular home she had designed. This was her dream home, he says. On the surface, Janet had it all, a dream house. 2 beautiful children, an art career, and a successful husband. But something must have gone terribly wrong, because around 8 p.m. on August 15, 1996, Perry March says she just walked out. On that warm summer night, Perry says his wife packed some bags, walked out the door, and drove off. March says Janet never told him where she was going, and says when he asked her, she said, "None of your business. I'll see you in a couple days. See how it is with the kids." Since that night, no one has ever reported seeing Janet March again. Perry March says the evening started with a relatively normal family dinner. It was after he put their 2 children to bed, Perry says, that he and Janet began to argue. You know, it's the kind of argument that you have when you're both tired of the arguments. She had made a decision that she was going to take a vacation, he recalls. His wife was going away, Perry says, for 12 days and was to come back just in time for their son Sammy's 6th birthday on August 27th. Change the light bulbs, balance my checkbook, clean the basement, Just a various list of things that I had seemed to have dropped the ball on in the course of my 10 years with her, he remembers. And she made me sign her list, that I would have these things done when she got back. And she said, "See ya," and the door turned and she started her Volvo, and she drove off. No one else, not even Janet's parents, knew she was going away. Carolyn Levine says, Perry called at midnight on August 15th to tell them Janet had left. I said, "Perry, don't worry about it. I'm sure if you had an argument, she's upset. She's probably driving around to cool off. She'll be back. Call me when she comes home," Levine remembers. But Janet didn't come back in the morning, and Carolyn Levine says she began to worry about her daughter. Perry says he thought his wife might be luxuriating at a hotel, and that her disappearance was a stunt to make him understand what life as a young mother was like. Perry says he became worried after the 3rd or 4th day, because I knew what she had taken with her, and I knew it wasn't the amount of things that she needed for an extended period of time. When Janet didn't call home, her husband and her parents started looking for her. They called her friends. They went to the airport parking lot and looked for her car in the parking lot. They called hotels in Nashville and out of state. What they didn't do, oddly enough, is call the police. Perry says he didn't call police because he says the Levines forbade him to call the authorities. They were very concerned that if we reported something to the authorities, it would end up embarrassing Janet, and that would make my situation with her worse, he says. But the Levines say it was Perry who didn't want to call the police. Perry insisted he didn't want to go to the police. He wanted to see a private investigator, says Larry Levine. Perry calls that an outright lie. You can believe Janet's husband or not, but the fact is that the family waited a full 2 weeks before Perry and his father-in-law walked into a police station in Nashville and reported that Janet was missing. Why did it take 2 weeks? Well, that's my mistake. That's my mistake. Because I was living with these people, I loved these people, Perry says. And Larry Levine also says they made a mistake. But Perry kept telling us, maybe she went here. Maybe she went there. He told us a story. And unfortunately, I believed him, Carolyn Levine adds. At first, this was just another missing person case to Nashville detective Mickey Miller. The first thing we did is start checking credit card accounts and things of that nature, says Miller. But Janet had not left a paper trail. Already worried, Janet's friends knew something was very wrong when Janet wasn't there for Sammy's 6th birthday party. Then, just a week into their investigation, police found Janet's car parked in the lot of an apartment complex, just a few miles from the March house. We found a lot of her personal items, including her passport, says Detective Miller. 3 weeks after Janet disappeared, with no credit card use, no phone calls home to check on the kids, and her car found with most of her belongings still packed inside, police decided this was no longer just a missing person case. It was a homicide. The Levine family and their friends posted a $25,000 reward for information, leading to the location of Mrs. March or her body, police announced. And the prime suspect in the case was Perry March. Perry refused police requests to interview him or his children. When he also refused to allow his house to be searched, police got a warrant. 1 month after the disappearance, police went inch by inch through the house. We vacuumed all the floors. We collected the vacuum bags out of the vacuums that belonged here. We even processed these hardwood floors for fingerprints and palm prints, recalls Nashville crime scene investigator Johnny Hunter. Investigators searched nearby woods, 2 lakes and a river, yet found no trace of Janet and no evidence that a crime had even been committed. They couldn't find some other reason to explain Janet's being missing. They couldn't find anything, and therefore it must be me, says Perry. But there was one thing about the search that really bothered police, and still does. Not what they found, but what they didn't find. Perry had told police that a list Janet had given him the night she left had been created on their home computer. That list was practically the only piece of evidence that backed up his story. But police didn't believe him. In fact, they wanted to get their hands on the computer's hard drive because they believed it might show that Perry, not Janet, had written the list. The problem was that the hard drive was missing. Perry says he did not remove the hard drive. Asked who he thinks removed it, Perry says, "Well, there's two people that are high on my list who could have removed it. One of them is Larry Levine, and the other is my father." Perry's father, Arthur March, had come to stay at Perry's house several days after Janet disappeared. But he says he doesn't even know what a hard drive is. And Larry Levine also said he did not remove the hard drive. "I had nothing to gain by trying to get at it," he says. Meanwhile, police became concerned about something else they didn't find: the tires on Perry's car. 6 days after Janet disappeared, Perry replaced the tires with new ones. "It was on my list. The tires on the Jeep were bald. And she was worried the Jeep was going to be slipping in the rain and all this other kind of stuff, and I was just knocking off the stuff on my list," says Perry. But according to Detective Miller, the tire company says that the tires did not need to be changed. In fact, they questioned that, why the tires were being changed, and Perry said he just didn't like the type tires that were on the car at the time, and he wanted a different brand. Yet even as investigators became convinced that he was involved in his wife's disappearance, they couldn't come up with the evidence to charge Perry March with a crime. When their daughter first disappeared, the Levines struggled to make sense of their son-in-law's account that, after an argument, she packed her bags and left on a 12-day vacation. One thing that troubled Carolyn was the appointment her daughter had talked about the day she disappeared. "She asked me to go with her the next day to see a divorce lawyer," says Carolyn. When Perry was named as a suspect and stopped cooperating with police, the Levines' suspicions grew. Larry Levine says he is 100% certain Perry killed Janet. "Unconditionally positive," he says. The Levines made their first move the day Perry was named as a suspect. They filed a court action to stop him from taking Sammy and Zeepy out of town. But that very day, Perry moved with his children to Chicago. The Levines then went to a Chicago court to file for visitation rights with their grandchildren. After a 2-year legal battle, a Chicago court granted the Levines weekend visitation rights. But when they showed up in a courtroom in the spring of 1999 to finalize the agreement, Perry wasn't there. He had moved to Mexico. "I moved to Mexico because I needed to get the hell out of Dodge and start a new life, and get out of their clutches," says Perry. Perry and his 2 children settled into a new life in Ahihec, the Mexican town his father Arthur had retired to years earlier. Arthur March helped his son get started on a new career as a financial and real estate advisor. Perry and his children moved into a house, along with Carmen Rojas, who he met during his first week in Mexico, and her 3 children. They married within a year. His old life in Nashville was a chapter Perry was now more than ready to close. As for what happened to his first wife, Janet, Carmen Rojas says she doesn't know what happened or why she went away. "I've told the children the truth, that Mommy left home. We don't know what happened to her. It's very sad. But that's the truth," says Perry. The truth for the Levines was also very sad, but totally different. 2 months after Perry fled with their grandchildren to Mexico, Janet's parents filed a wrongful death claim against their former son-in-law in a Nashville civil court. When Perry failed to show up in court to fight the charge, Judge Frank Clement ruled against him and found him wrongfully responsible for causing her death. For the Levines, it was a vindication. But Perry says he thinks it's a crock. "I think it's unconstitutional," he says. After a year in Mexico, there was no question for Sammy March, then age 9, and his sister Zeepy, 6 at the time, that this was their home with their dad, Perry, and their new mom, Carmen. But 1,500 miles away, the Levines desperately wanted to see their grandchildren. Since the Levines' action against him for the wrongful death of their daughter, Perry had refused to let them have contact with the children. So in May 2000, the Levines showed up at their son-in-law's front door, armed with legal papers from the United States, granting them visitation and demanding to see their grandchildren. Perry refused to let the Levines visit Sammy and Zippy, and the grandparents went back to Nashville. But then, a month later, came a day Perry says he'll never forget. It was just after 9 a.m., and Sammy and Zippy were just starting their school day. Perry was in his office. 4 Mexicans walk in. One of them with a badge and a uniform says he's from immigration, and I'm to come with him immediately, he recalls. They grabbed me under the arms and put me in a headlock, lifted me by my ears, lifted me off my feet and shoved me through my conference room doors. And all I get is your paperwork is not in order. You're coming with us. I get down the stairs and there's an unmarked old white van in the parking lot. The door opens and they throw me in. These guys grab me in the car, hold me down, and the van takes off. At that very moment, a convoy of cars was approaching the entrance to Sammy and Zippy's school. Inside the cars were a local lawyer, a Mexican judge, several Mexican policemen, and the Levines. This time, the Levines got Mexican authorities to help them execute their court-ordered visitation, and Perry was in no position to try and stop them. What did he think was going on? I think my kids are being grabbed. Which is exactly what was occurring, says Perry. But word of what was happening at the school immediately got to Arthur March. This was the second time they came to kidnap my grandchildren, he says. Arthur March raced to the school and says he told Larry Levine to get out of there and leave my kids alone. Larry Levine claims Arthur March threatened him, allegedly telling him that neither he or his wife would get out of Mexico alive. Asked if he ever pulled a gun on the Levines or anyone working for them, Arthur March responds with shrugs and a smile. Back in the speeding van, Perry realized his armed captors were taking him to the airport. He decided to take a gamble. He dropped the name of the immigration official he suspected his captors were working for. The chief of the van got out and got on a cell phone. 3 minutes of conversation. He gets back into the van, turns around to me, and says, "It's a terrible mistake. I'm sorry. Your paperwork is in order," Perry recalls. When he was finally released, Perry sped off toward the school. "I was so angry I probably could have killed someone at that time," he says. He was too late. After a chaotic hour of arguments and threats, school administrators handed Sammy and Zippy over to the Mexican judge, who in turn handed them over to the Levines. When they brought the kids down and they saw us, they just came running. I just kind of knelt down and we hugged them, and they were happy to see us. And we were overjoyed to see them, remembers Carolyn Levine. By the time Perry reached the school, the Levines and his children were gone. But just behind the Levines, in hot pursuit, was Arthur March. "Maybe I wasn't thinking rationally, but those are my grandkids," he says. "We were very scared. We were very scared of this man," says Carolyn Levine. "I believed that he would try and kill us." "Absolutely," Larry Levine adds. Eventually, the Levines lost Arthur March and headed for an airport. Within 24 hours, Sammy and Zippy were back in Nashville. "They are kidnappers. It was all a big orchestration," says Perry. But Larry Levine denies they are kidnappers. Absolutely not. How did the Levines choose that day to pick up their grandchildren? They had gotten a warning from the FBI that Mexican immigration officials planned to question, and maybe even deport Perry that morning. This would be a good time, they were told, to try once again to enforce their court order for visitation. "This was a court order in which we were doing what the court said we had a right to do," says Larry Levine. While the court order said they had to return the children to their father in 39 days, The Levines were now taking steps to get permanent custody of Sammy and Zippy. They enrolled the children in a Nashville school. Back in Mexico, Perry was afraid he was going to lose his children for good. But then everything changed. Two heroes showed up in my life, lawyers by the name of Bob Katz and John Herbison, who had been following my case and volunteered to get my children back for me, says March. His American attorneys found a law that changed everything, not a Tennessee law, not even a United States law, but an international treaty. The bottom line is that this treaty says that you can't steal children and try to make custody determinations in the jurisdiction where you stole them to, says Perry. His lawyers took the case to a U.S. federal court and won. The Levines were told to send the children back with all due speed. Perry says his kids' return was a celebration. The first thing they did is they hugged me and said, "Daddy, why did it take so long to get us home?" By the summer of 2005, Perry and his new family had settled into life in Mexico. Sammy and Zippy were stars in their school, and Perry and Carmen opened a cafe. But 9 years after Janet's disappearance, police were about to make a stunning arrest. On the morning of August 3, 2003, Perry arrived at his restaurant around 8 a.m. His perfect world was about to collapse. Mexican immigration authorities grabbed Perry, saying his visa had been revoked. They were deporting him back to the United States immediately. Perry wasn't allowed to go pack a bag or kiss his wife and children goodbye, and was driven directly to the Guadalajara airport and put on a plane. The investigation into the murder of Janet March became the mission of Nashville's cold case detectives, Sergeant Pat Postiglione and Bill Pridemore, in 2002. 2.5 years later, they took their evidence to a grand jury. The grand jury proceedings were conducted entirely in secret in December 2004, and 59 witnesses testified. In the end, and without his knowledge, Perry was indicted for the murder of his wife. After the indictment, the FBI and Nashville cops worked with Mexican immigration officials to get Perry out of Mexico and back on U.S. soil, where he could be arrested. Perry's plane landed in Los Angeles, the first time he had entered the United States since fleeing to Mexico years ago. Once in L.A., he was arrested for Janet's murder and handed over to detectives Postiglione and Pridemore, who took him back to Nashville. For the Levines, the news of Perry's return to Nashville was bittersweet. Almost immediately, they started working to get the children back, going to court to seek custody. It took weeks and a number of court appearances, but eventually the Levines won custody. Perry, in the meantime, had gathered a team of lawyers and was fighting the criminal charges against him in preliminary hearings. In addition to second-degree murder, Perry had been indicted for tampering with evidence and, despite the fact that Janet's body had never been found, the macabre charge of abuse of a corpse. Perry's lawyer pleaded not guilty on his behalf. Prosecutors are tight-lipped about any evidence they plan to present at the trial, but acknowledge much of the case is circumstantial, including the new tires Perry put on the family car after Janet disappeared, the missing hard drive from his home computer, and the discrepancies with Perry's original story of Janet's departure. Detective Miller, though no longer working the case, will be a key witness. Perry said that when Janet left, that she had written out a message, allegedly that she was going to go on an extended 12-day vacation, says Miller. The problem, says Miller, is that her son's birthday party was coming up. I think if you look at the date that she disappeared, on the 15th, and you add that 12 days to it, that would have her coming back on the 27th. And that would make sense because Sammy's birthday was on the 27th, he says. What somebody didn't think about was that Janet had already sent out invitations for his party for the 25th, 2 days before that. The grand jury also heard from a friend of Janet's, who spoke to her the very evening she disappeared. She had called to arrange a playdate with Sammy and her son for the next day. On the morning of August 16th, Sammy's friend and his mother showed up at the March house. The women rang the doorbell, knocked on the door, got no answer, and let themselves in. The woman walked down a hallway towards the kitchen, calling out to see if anyone was at home. When she got to a room, she says she heard Perry March's voice coming from behind that door. She says he asked who it was. She told him, and he sent her on her way. But she did not leave before noticing something in the room that she later described as strange. There was a new oriental rug, fairly large rug. It was rolled up, basically blocking the doorway where you go into Perry's study and Janet's art studio, says Detective Miller. Investigators have not found this rug, and Miller says Perry has denied its existence. The police theory is that after killing Janet, Perry put her body inside that rug and then buried it. That's a complete farce. I know the house I lived in, and I know there was no oriental rug in our house other than one runner this wide. If she had been wrapped in that rug, she would have looked like a hot dog wrapped, like one of those little sausages wrapped that you see on an appetizer tray, he said. The rug issue came up again in a recent bond hearing. Radina Friedman, who was Sammy March's court-appointed guardian during the early custody battles between Perry March and the Levines, said Sammy remembers the night his mother left. The night his mother disappeared, he heard his parents fighting. He did not see them. He heard them fighting. And then he fell asleep. When he woke up the following morning, his mother was gone. He saw a rug that was rolled up somewhere in the vicinity of the kitchen, and when he returned later that day, the rug was gone, says Friedman. And there is yet another bizarre and surprising twist in this case. Prosecutors now claim that Perry, while in jail, conspired with his father to kill Janet's parents, the people he blames for all of his troubles with the law. Prosecutors say after the job was done, Arthur would meet the killer at the Guadalajara airport, pay him off, and help him get away. Authorities say they got wind of the plan and they set up the meeting with Arthur March. It's BS, and they know it. The guy was never here. That's entrapment. They used the FBI to entrap me, says Arthur March. So in addition to the charge of murdering Janet, Perry, along with his father, faces charges of conspiracy to kill her parents. But Arthur March is taking a come-and-get-me stance. According to my lawyers here, what they do in the United States doesn't affect me here. I don't go peacefully. I don't go like Perry. There's going to be bloodshed somewhere, theirs or mine. Perry's lawyers say they will mount a vigorous defense. Their client has always proclaimed his innocence. Did you get in an argument with her that night? Did you get violent? Did you kill her, either accidentally or on purpose, and then dispose of the body? Lagatuta asked. The question is highly offensive to me. I know it's your job to ask it, and the answer is no, says March. Perry March's trial for Janet's murder is expected to start next summer. Sammy and ZP March are now living with the Levines in Nashville. If acquitted, March plans to fight to regain custody of his children. Arthur March remains a fugitive in Mexico. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by subscribing and liking the video. And turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.